Are we live? Are we live? Are we live? We're back, people. What's up? How we doing? Going over the defensive line room today. Doing a nice little breakdown for there. Gonna continue this little series we got going on before training camp and maybe into training camp. Taking different looks at the groups. What we're seeing. I think the defensive line group is pretty interesting because I think we have a clear number one with Sieler being that guy in that room. Gonna see the most snaps if he stays healthy. And then I think, Calais and T Tart are kind of, the 2, 3. So you have that top 3 kind of figured out. But then behind that, it's really up for grabs. Like, there's so many different bodies within that defensive line room. And usually you keep like 5, 6, depending on, how that mixes in with your edges. But we're just pretty much going in from across the board. We have a different skill set of guys all around. Guys that do different things. That's why we're going to go into everyone. We got Neville Gallimore, Bonito Jones, Deshon Hand, Jonathan Harris, Brendan Peely. I think those guys have a chance to fight for a spot. Like, it really could go in either direction. And then we have some other names here like Isaiah Mack, who I don't know too much about. Personally, haven't seen much from him. And then we have 2 UDFAs, Leonard Payne and Mario Kendricks, who I don't really see making the roster, but you never know with this type of depth. There's a lot of bodies here, but not a lot of guys who are locks. Like Jones, Bonito Jones, Jonathan Harris, and Neville Gallimore, and Deshon Hand all saw playing time last year. Hand was more of a rotational guy for Miami, and then players like Bonito Jones and Jonathan Harris even started for their respective teams that time. So it should be pretty interesting to see. I'll let people, roll through here, get in here real quick to really start getting into it. But oh, that's too bright. It's in my face. Let me look through some of these. Interesting. I think one of the biggest sort of question marks I have about this team is especially on that, defensive front, defensive tackles. Like, I know Weaver's going to like get the most out of this group because, he's a defensive line coach. If you go look at Baltimore, like Justin Madubuike is a good player for that team, but he ended up with 13 sacks. I think you might see some similar production out of Sieler. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Sieler had some insane production statistically, or at least making an impact, because we'll look at some of the clips of Sieler, and he'll be one of the next guys I do a film breakdown on, so I definitely want to get into him. But man, he's going to be really good with all the twists and stunts they're going to do within this scheme. A lot of these guys can play multiple different spots, which is helpful because they're going to play multiple fronts, different types of, they'll see like a 3-4, 4-3, unders, overs, all of those types of things. And you have guys like Calais who will play all the way across the line. Like, to me, I actually felt pretty good about Jonathan Harris, who came from Denver, making the roster. But he was kind of the guy that was playing the Campbell role, who's kind of like a smaller for an interior guy, but can play as like a big edge at times. So playing that like 3-4 front as a DN, playing as like a 5 tech, stuff like that. I think Jonathan Harris definitely would have been intriguing. He still has a chance to fight for the role. It's just, then you have guys like Bonito Jones, who's more of a 1 tech, Gallimore, who's like a 1/3. Hand is kind of in that same conversation with Campbell and Harris as types of players, as we'll talk about too. But Sieler's really the headliner of that group. But let me just check something real quick. Go to YouTube. Gotta make sure we're all up and good. If you guys have, obviously, if you guys have questions, leave them in the chat. I'll try to get them answered. Boom. Yeah, so we are live. Okay, cool. Just make sure I'm not talking to myself, which has happened not on stream when I've been trying to stream, but when I've been recording videos, I realized I was never recording, or I was muted and I had to remake the video, which is tough. Okay. I want to show, I think this is it, right? Let me go here. Here. Okay. This is a game versus Tennessee. We got Sieler right here. This is the stuff that I think is going to be very common. A lot of the game work up front. And it's something Sieler's very good at. Sieler is the guy crashing down. And this is actually Aaron Brewer, the new Dolphins center. And he absolutely catches him off guard and destroys him. Takes him out of the play. And also the left guard doesn't swap off. Who actually really makes the big mistake here because he's got to pass this off and take Wilkins. But Wilkins gets credit, for the pressure, the sack, gets all of the stats there. But this play is really all Sieler with how he sets this up. He's one of the best guys at it, taking angles. He doesn't just instantly go attack the center. You got to push up, get this left guard to get hands on you, but then also eat up that space, take this guy out of the equation. He also does a good job sometimes where he stays on his feet and then continues going after the quarterback and gets there still as the crash guy. But Sieler, I think, is going to dominate. This is how they're going to be able to create some simulated pressures up front from that interior look. They have a lot of edge guys who can get after the quarterback, but with people being hurt up front this season, I think getting some more interior pressures that's created from different play calls, will be helpful. And I think Sieler, he can win his one-on-ones too, obviously, but this is the type of thing where I really think he'll make his biggest impact as a pass rusher in the pass game next season. Sieler, Tart, Campbell, first team. Yeah, I agree. That would be like your main in base. They probably could rotate different spots too. You're gonna see more nickels, so it'll only be 2 guys. But yeah, those will be your top 3 for sure. And then you're saying Gallimore, Bonito, Hand as the second teamers. Yeah, that's what it's listed on here as well right now, and that's what I would guess too, because I do think Jonathan Harris after those guys is like the next wave. Also, I think you have so many bodies here. Like, you're going to get some defensive tackles on the practice squad that I could also see getting playing time at some point during the season. I just think Harris is, after signing Calais Campbell, I think, and you have Deshon Hand who kind of play that similar role, Jonathan Harris probably gets pushed back a little bit. I think the Campbell signing probably hurt him the most, just because that was kind of what Harris had, the skill set that Campbell has. I mean, he's not as good as Calais Campbell, but that was kind of where he could set himself apart from players like Bonito Jones or Neville Gallimore. Who, it's not like I'm super high on them, but as rotational pieces, they're not too bad, and they're different styles too. We'll get into them a little bit later on. Let's see, do I have more Sieler clips here? Which play is this? No, not that play. Let me find some good Zach Sieler stuff, because yeah, I think Bonito has a pretty decent shot, because after like Tart, I think Bonito's like really the only like 1-tech 0 guy on the team that can play some nose 1-tech. Like, you have the other guys can play it, but I don't think they can play it like consistently. So that, I think that should help him get a roster spot. So I think that's always a pretty decent shout. But definitely be making a video on Sieler soon, because I think Sieler is in for an absolute breakout. I think he's always been an underrated player. He got paid for how he got paid. I think he's actually still underpaid too, like compared to like the rest of the league. Like, he's always been a very, very consistent, solid run defender. And for a guy, late round draft pick, I believe, he went to Baltimore first, so actually has some experience within this type of system that Weaver's going to be bringing over. And he still is able to do stuff like this, is instantly penetrate. He's still able to win one-on-ones. It's not just him constantly, we see him at the club rip here. It's not him just constantly having to just like create for other people with him like crashing down. Like, he can create some pressures on his own too. And then obviously just always been very solid as a run defender. Like, Wilkins was always the better player, but when you consider contract comparison, like, I'm taking Sieler on his contract compared to what Wilkins got. Isn't Jones really the only other guy who plays 0? Yeah, that's why I was saying, like, that's why I give Bonito kind of the upper hand on some of the other players. Because Gallimore has some experience playing 1-tech, but I don't really see him as, like, he can be a penetrating 1-tech, but he's not really a 1-tech that's going to hold up at the point of attack. Bonito's more of like a holding up at the point of attack type of player. Deshon Hand is more of like he can play. He won't play on that. He like 3-tech is probably the most interior Deshon Hand should be, and he can play like 5 as well. Or I do all of those types of things. He's kind of like Jonathan Harris, so I think if Harris was going to take over someone, I would guess it would be more Deshon Hand, just because they're more similar types. What's up, Nicholas? How you guys doing? But yeah, that's how I really wanted to go into Zach Sieler. I'm going to do a big film breakdown. I think Sieler will probably be next. I'm not quite sure. I mean, you guys can give me some suggestions in the comments of who you want to see film breakdowns on next, because I've been, getting all the new people. Like, I did ones on Marcus May, Calais Campbell. I just did one on Devon Achane, but just his receiving reps, because I made that video. Literally, I made a video, and like an hour later, there was like a bunch of articles about Achane's receiving, going to be like more of a receiving threat this season. So that was good timing on my part. I think Peely to the practice squad this year. Yeah, I think Peely is a prime practice squad candidate. I actually don't have super high hopes about him making the roster, but You gotta think, like, with how the practice squad is now, I feel like people kind of, like, throw away practice squad players, but, like, fans, like, when they think about practice squad players, those guys end up playing snaps, like, a decent amount of them, so the practice squad is always important to pay attention to, because you never know with injuries, you never know how things will play out. Like, usually those guys will end up getting pulled up, at least a handful of them. You think they'll use Campbell as a full starter or as like a red zone printer? No, I think Campbell will be in the top 3 rotation. So I definitely, like, when you look at their, like, he'll definitely see plenty of playing time. I don't think it really matters where they are on the field. Maybe as I've talked about it, I think some other people have talked about it, we could see Campbell, especially early on in the season, more as like he'll play all across the line, but like playing as like a big edge at times. Because last year in Atlanta, I don't know if you guys saw my video on him, but last year in Atlanta, he actually played a lot of reps as like a 5 to 9 tech at times and would win on the outside, even as a pass rusher. So I could see that while Phillips and Chubb are recovering, you could see Campbell definitely getting like a handful of snaps on the edge in specific situations. And I wouldn't mind that too. Because you're going to see him moving around. You're going to see, pass rush situations. You're going to have some of your edges bounce into the inside, get your matchups. Because Campbell can absolutely outpower and physical some tackles. And then you have your edges who can, win with their athleticism, their quickness off the line to beat some guards, which is nice. But yeah, Sieler, definitely the guy up front, I guess, to say. Kind of the first time I think he'll be that guy in Miami, because he's always played with Wilkins. So it'll be fun to see how he steps up into that role. Like, he's always been a very quality football player. Here he is versus the run. He plays with a lot of gap, integrity, gap discipline, all of that stuff. Very important. He can play as like different like roles too. Like, he doesn't have to just be like, he does a great job versus a double team here. When you're getting double teams like this, you want to really single out one guy, square him up, and then he like dips that shoulder too to really avoid this guy attacking his low hip. So he just gets complete control of the left guard here, dips underneath the tackle too, and then now he's in complete control of the situation. He's 2-gapping here. This is his primary gap, peeks to the inside. Once he sees a running back go back to the outside, bounce it away, he's able to stack, shed, hold him up. He can win as a 2-gapper, a 1.5, 1-gapper as well. All of those things are nice. And then here's like an example of him crashing out. We talked about the stunts earlier. There's gonna be so much stunt stuff used within Weaver's new system, and we talked about him as a crasher. And here he is as a crasher. Last time he took out all these players, and Wilkins got the sack. Here he still takes out all the players. He knocks the center to the ground. The left guard this time picks it up. With how powerful Sieler is, balance. He's able to get after the quarterback even as the crash guy. I mean, that stuff is impressive. Always been a super underappreciated guy throughout the league, not by Dolphins fans. I think, Dolphin fans always had at least for a few years now, I've had a pretty good recognition of his skills, which is nice. Yeah, Scotty, that's a good point about the unlimited stuff. Like, you're going to see even more practice squad. Like, practice squad has been making more. I feel like practice squad players have been making at least a semi-impact for Miami for a few years now. So it'll be, I think, even more important with some of the guys they keep on their practice squad. And I think I could see them only keeping like 5 D linemen and then keeping multiple of these guys on the practice squad. Potentially some of the UDFAs too that they brought in, like Leonard Payne, who's kind of definitely a developmental player, pretty athletic, but yeah. Sieler is actually elite. Campbell played over summer. I think Weaver has a plan for him. They're already acquainted. Yeah, he'll definitely play plenty of snaps. I don't think they even need him to play 700. Just playing a decent amount. There will be a heavy rotation. If you look at Baltimore's snap counts for their D linemen, I don't have it off the top of my head, but I have looked at them before, and it's a very quality rotation, like percentage wise. And that's not something the Dolphins did. Like I think Wilkins last year was like the number 1 percentage at defensive tackle. I think Sieler was like 4. So they've always kind of like overplayed those guys. They didn't really have anyone behind it. So this year they kind of sacrificed, Wilkins to add more depth to the position, which I think can be good specifically for this Weaver defense, which is nice. But yeah, that's how I wanted to talk about Sieler. Let's talk about Tier Tart next, because I think Tart is another one that I have some questions about. I think talent-wise, he could be your second defensive lineman this year, because Campbell's up there in age. I expect Campbell to play a lot, and Tart is super talented, man. Like, when you watch him, like his high-end reps are so good. A guy that of his size and his movement skills at his size are super impressive. But he was cut last season for, they said it was for effort reasons or maybe care reasons for the games. And he also had some complaints about playing time. So there was that type of things. And, I try not to put too much stock into those reports. You can see how dominant he's on these reps. Because, I don't know the player. So I try to, take those things with a grain of salt. I got to see it with my own eyes if he does, play with poor effort. I didn't really notice it too heavily on the film either. Maybe there was like a rep or two it happened. But maybe it was more of an attitude thing. But plus I've heard, from camp, there was like that thing of him being out of shape potentially, but he was apparently also injured. So that kind of plays into it. But as you can see, man, his explosiveness off the ball, I think is very valuable to this team's season with his amount of talent. If he can play up to the potential that he has in the past, because he has had some very good play over these past few seasons, that will be very, very important. 500 snaps for Campbell seems a wheelhouse for me. Yeah, something around there. Tart better work on his conditioning. Yeah, that's what I was kind of saying. It was early. It's early, so don't want to put too much stock in that yet. But that's kind of the question marks I have with him. It's less to do with the on-field stuff because I think his film is actually really good. I was actually really impressed with how sometimes he'll take over games, and he did a lot of stuff in Tennessee, playing as like a 1-tech. He'll play as like a 2-eye. He can do stuff as a 3 as well, which is good because Sieler's a guy that can really move around the line. But I think they needed, and Campbell, out of those guys like Sieler, Tart, and Campbell, Tart is definitely the guy that has the most experience playing as like a 1 to a 0 to 2, a 2-eye. So you definitely need him to show up and being able to play that role because he's your best player in that area because he can absolutely win it with his explosiveness, as we saw in some of those clips. I'm still watching like different ones. It's very exciting, definitely a fun player. But then he can also just hold his own at the point of attack, win in multiple different ways, and then just he knows how to use his hands too. Pretty fluid player for his size, but yeah. That was kind of like the main question marks I have with Tart. Feel very good about him as like his film. Like his film is very solid. I think especially as like you're getting him on the very cheap as well. It just comes down to like the effort and conditioning that we've heard reports about, but don't want to put any crazy stock into that stuff yet. Yeah, Scotty, Tart's on a 1-year prove-it deal. That's kind of what I'm thinking. This is like a low risk. You're not putting too much risk into it, but it's a high reward potential. So that's kind of like why I'm very excited to see where that plays out. Because in my opinion, after Sieler, he has the potential to be like your next defensive lineman that could really shine and make a lot of plays especially within this system. Because Weaver, as we've known, if you watch the Baltimore Ravens defense, they do a really good job of helping their defensive linemen get really good looks. They align them all over the field. Versatile is very important to them too, and that's kind of the stuff I want to see. We'll go back here, yeah. Tier Tart, but just doing it for Tennessee as a 1-tech, multiple different stuff, taking on double teams. You can see him holding his own at the point of attack versus double team. Very good, dropping that anchor. Not getting moved, but then also getting down laterally, just different types of reps that show up here. Winning, we saw from some of the reps earlier where he just was like, that's a very impressive 2-gap rep right there that we just saw. Especially straight up as the nose. You can see him kind of reset the center, control him with his power, and like the lower body flexion fluidity doesn't get moved off and then is able to peel off and then help make that tackle on the running back. But then we've also just seen him, get across, still pulling that guy there. But then some of the reps where he just like beat guys with quickness, good hand usage. Those are the things that kind of excite me the most when it comes to Tart. Yeah, Tart definitely flashy. I even think the Titans kind of viewed him as like as a big time player for them like a couple years ago. I think just there was those reports that came out about him, but yeah. And then who do I want to talk about? We'll talk about Calais next because those are the top 3 guys. We talked about Sieler and Tart. If you guys have any more questions about them, leave them in the chat. But yeah, Calais is going to be, I think, one of your top 3 guys as well. I think he's kind of on the same playing field for me as Tart. I wouldn't be surprised if Campbell actually saw more playing time early on in the season than Tart, just because he's very familiar with the system. He's coming in from Baltimore. I always think that's huge. Everything you ever hear about him too is like he's a great veteran and leadership presence, which is great. Always great things to have from those guys. But the biggest thing that surprised me is how good Campbell actually still is. Like when I turned on his film, I was actually so impressed with how like active he is at 37, 38, whatever he is now. Because I know he used to be great back in the day when you watch his film, but he still gets after it. It's not like perfect play 24/7, but it's still hot, like very, very solid. Definitely impressed with that stuff. So if you guys saw my film breakdown on him, that was like not too long ago, you know, within the past week. It was mostly Falcons plays because that's was the recent season, but then I got some Baltimore plays in there where in Baltimore, he actually played more on the interior in Baltimore. So, and then in Atlanta, as I talked about earlier, he played a lot of snaps on the edge, playing as like a 5 to 9 tech. Did a lot of that stuff and even won his one-on-one reps there. And I love that versatility. I think he'll see more of that than he did in Baltimore, but less than he did in Atlanta. I think, you know, Baltimore still wanted to see him move around the interior, you know, play as like a 3 tech when you're one-on-ones. He obviously has ridiculous size and length. He has ridiculous size and length, which he uses to beat up like tackles, but then he has like still really good athleticism for his age, like and his size, where he can beat the interior guys with that athleticism. It just makes him such a mismatch nightmare on a consistent basis. And he's just a smart player. We've heard Weaver even talk about it. If you watch old Weaver interviews, he just talks about how smart he is pre-snap, and you definitely notice that stuff on the film. But still just like an absolutely insane athlete for a guy of his age and size, which is crazy. But yeah, Chop, Sieler, Tart, Campbell lineup sounds nice. I mean, it's a pretty interesting lineup if you have just those 4 on the field, but definitely intriguing skill sets there for sure. A lot of athleticism, different types of players with their quickness and length and stuff. And I also think like Campbell, like we talked about Chop moving to the interior on pass rushing reps. I wouldn't even be surprised if they bump Calais on the outside on some of those reps because he's one of those guys that do it. Because when you have those guys on the field and you bump someone to the edge, you have to bump someone else. And like we've seen Sieler do it where he plays as like a big edge snap. When you have guys like Chop and Phillips, because Phillips has played reps on the inside in those obvious passing situations. So having Campbell that then can bump to the outside and still create pressure from the outside while you're moving those guys to the interior, that's actually like the perfect combination because usually you don't have those big body D tackles that can bump to the outside when you want to move your edges interior and still make like an impact. But Campbell's one of those guys that can, which I think is big. Yeah, I think you're right, Irving. Definitely recall that type of stuff. He can do it in so many. He can just win in so many different ways, from so many different spots too. Like usually when, like I talked about, like he beats tackles with power and you know his length, and he beats interior guys with his athleticism. But he also can do it the opposite way. Like he can still hold up against the interior and like bully guys with his length. And you can also, I've seen him like rush off the edge as like just a pure athlete. And, you know, get underneath, bend, and get to the quarterback without even having to really utilize his hands too much, which is crazy. So it's being able to win in multiple different ways that I think is super impressive about his play. But yeah. But yeah, those are the top 3 guys. Sieler, Tart, Campbell, for sure. Feel very confident about those guys being the top 3 guys. The only one I think could potentially, like I think, you know, Sieler obviously, and I think Campbell, I feel very good about Campbell's floor with the team. I think Tart's just the question mark there when it comes to like some of the, you know, effort conditioning stuff. But if that's all good, he's definitely talent-wise top 3 for sure. That's kind of where the question marks come in out of those guys. But Campbell will, I think, come in right away and be ready, which is nice to see. I hope they line him up over Paul at training camp. That would be an interesting battle, especially. It'd be interesting just to see Campbell line up against Patrick Paul just because of their size alone. Those are 2 absolutely huge human beings, and they're both like Campbell's like 6'8" and Paul's like 6'7". So it'd be a fun battle too because Paul is like super raw and young, and then Campbell's very old and also very athletic, but obviously has a lot of experience. Probably could help him out too. Yeah. Just reading what you guys were saying. Okay. Neville Gallimore. That's who I'm probably going to talk about next. pull up some Gallimore stuff. Do I have any Gallimore stuff here? Let's see, right? Okay, here we go. Here's a Gallimore rep. Here he's like playing as a 3 tech. I actually think in Dallas, they ran a lot of 4-3 fronts, so he basically only really played in Dallas as a 3 and a 1. He kind of never, like, the reason I kind of feel, and you get to see him power up there, to me with Gallimore, when I look at Gallimore, he was a pretty, like, high, I think he was like a 3rd round pick, if I remember correctly, out of Oklahoma. I definitely watched his film a lot coming out of college. He never quite lived up to that, so he does have experience, I think, playing with the Dolphins D line coach. I think he played with it's with Austin Clark. I'm pretty sure on that. So he has experience there with the D line coach, which I think helps him. That's why I'm just talking about making the roster. I think that helps him, and I also think potential like teams. I think in your building, people have seen, they've had more eyes on him just with how much higher of a draft pick he was. People are more experienced with him. But yeah, he's more of a 1-3 guy. He's a penetrating type of player. Not a lot of holding up at the point of attack, playing as like a 2-gap, using your hands to stack and shed. He has a lot to work out in that area, but he does have a good first step. Like, he's a first step explosiveness, and either get past you with that first step or then win with speed to power, like combine it all together. That's kind of where his flash plays come. But his film is quite inconsistent, so I definitely see him as a guy that's either in the rotation, probably in the rotation, if I had to guess. Like, he probably is a rotational guy, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he didn't end up making the squad, and they try to keep him on the practice squad, because he wasn't my favorite film to watch overall, just quite inconsistent. Ended up on the ground too often. I'm a big fan of like balanced players, like guys who are very under controlled balance. It always kind of concerns me when people get hit low and end up on the ground too often. He's just more of that inconsistent flash, make some big plays. He definitely has more splash plays than some of the other guys in this area that we're going to look at, like Bonito Jones, Jonathan Harris, Deshon Hand. So Gallimore is like that type of player, a little bit different than the rest of the group. But he definitely has a chance. He has enough still there, and I don't think he's that old either. Like, he's still, he's definitely not like, let me look up Gallimore's age. I don't think he's that old. I'm pretty sure he's got to be like, if I had to guess, he's like 26, 27 on the end of his first contract. He's 27, yeah, okay. That's what I thought. He's around there. So still, potentially, usually when you hit 27, you're about to hit your prime, usually in the NFL, and that range is the defensive tackle. But definitely have some question marks overall. Neville, like 200 to 250 snaps. Yeah, I do think out of the next, like, my guess is Gallimore has has a fairly good shot of making this team, just looking at the rest of the D tackle list and with his skill set. And I do think like he will be a part of that 5-man rotation, because in Baltimore they ran a 5-man rotation. If Gallimore makes that team, he'd obviously be a part of it. But I want Leonard Payne and Mario Kendricks to make it. I mean, that's both of them very unlikely. I mean, both of them is probably impossible. One, I would still say, is unlikely. I wouldn't mind keeping them on the practice squad. It's just, I don't know if they're going to trust UDFAs in that rotation, because they will rotate pretty heavily. Like, the backups will see playing time. That's the problem. Irving Paul's technique needs work. Yep. Don't got to tell me. I've talked about Patrick Paul enough. I haven't talked about Patrick Paul in a while, but I am excited to see what happens with him in training camp when the pads go on. And I'm very excited to watch his preseason film, because I have plenty of questions. I'm not sure I see any UDFAs making the 53 this year. This year, there's true depth competition, in my opinion. I kind of agree, Scotty. I'm going to guess one makes it, but I don't think it's going to be one of the D tackles. But my guess is one. But yeah, I think they're usually in the past, as we saw, like usually it's more than one for the Dolphins. Usually it's a few. But this year, I think it's more likely like 0 to 1. 2 at the most. But you never know with how training camp and preseason plays out. Some guys just really show up, and it's hard to cut those guys. 27, my guess. Okay, yeah, you're talking about the age. Gallimore is nice. I think he's more of a pass rusher specialist than he is a run defender. Agreed. He's definitely, yes, I should specify that. He's a shoot up the field. He's a penetrating type, as we talked about. He's not going to hold up at the point of attack. You're not going to want him to really 2-gap consistently. I'd rather have him rushing the passer than playing the run. And I have a problem with his balance. But yeah, I'm not too mad about it if he's just like a rotational guy, which he will be if he makes the team, which I think is fairly likely. Who do we have next? Yeah, there's just so many guys in that D-line room. I guess not a lot of them are locks though, which gives the UDFA guys a chance, because some of these positions, guys are just locks to make the team, and they don't even have, some of the guys don't even have a chance. But there's just a lot of bodies in that room. But we'll talk about Bonito Jones next. Bonito, I talked about him a little bit earlier, and I said I think he has a really good chance of making the team because he's kind of, after Tart, he's really the only guy who has experience playing as like a 0 and a 1 tech on a consistent basis. He played a lot of starting snaps last year for the Lions, which like he was a part of that Lions rotation pretty heavily and played a lot of snaps. And he does a decent job versus the run. He's not much gonna make too much of an impact as a pass rusher, but as a guy in the rotation that can maybe hold up on the run on early downs, I'm not too mad about it. I think he does a decent enough job there. Just playing discipline, like he's just not a super high impact player, but I would trust him more on a consistent basis than like Gallimore versus the run for sure. And they're just different types of players. Like Gallimore, you're gonna see they could both play 1, but Gallimore is more of like a penetrating 1-3, and then Bonito Jones more of like a 0-2i, play as a 2-gapper type. And I think the Dolphins kind of need that after Tart. They don't really have anyone else on the roster that really does that. Even behind them, I guess the other guy would be Peely, but I don't even see him as that type of player. And then the UDFAs are not those types of players either. Yeah. Some of the UDFA D-lines are undersized. Yeah, Leonard Payne and Mario Kendricks are very undersized. Here's the thing. Mario Kendricks is very undersized from what I remember, and he was very explosive. He was very fun to watch, actually. Like his athleticism is insane. So I don't mind keeping those types of guys on like the practice squad. You try to develop them. And then Leonard Payne was more of like a 5 tech with good movement skills, but like that guy did not have the play strength to hold up at the next level as of right now. So they have some exciting college film, I would say, because of their athleticism, and there's some intrigue there, but I don't see either of them making the roster. Not against either of them making the practice squad, though, depending on how it plays out. Because if you cut some of these guys that we're going to talk about, like if they cut Jonathan Harris, I could see Harris getting picked up and going somewhere else, because he did start and play many snaps for Denver last season. And I could see the Dolphins potentially keep him, potentially not. And then if those guys don't stick around the practice squad, then you keep your UDFAs, Same with like Brandon Peely, who was a UDFA last year. I feel if Chubbs are starting the season, that's a good point, Scotty. You got to think of it like that's why I never try to say anything with like certainty, because one, you're talking about Chubbs and Phillips who are already injured. That I definitely agree that that's going to impact some of the decisions they make, especially when it comes to D-line, because they could keep like a more athletic D-lineman that could play as like a big edge if they wanted to, instead of like an actual edge. If they feel they have a better chance of keeping the other one on the practice squad, I could see them doing that while Phillips and Chubb are recovering. And then you also have to think like other injuries could happen. Say, some of the guys we talked about gets hurt, then they could keep someone that's a UDFA. That's why I'm not like saying 0 UDFAs could make it, because you never know with injuries how it will all play out. But I think if they stay relatively healthy, then it's pretty unlikely any of these guys make the roster. Kendricks is always on the floor, too small. Yeah, Kendricks had some really good flash plays, but he's very small. Very small. They're going to move Chop and Muhammad all over the lines. They're playing, yeah, agreed. I'm a big fan of moving Chop around. Even Kamara has a lot of experience doing that stuff too. I think we've talked about it, what Weaver's going to do within the system. We talked about it in the secondary. Like versatility is so important with your ability to move people around pre-snap and give different looks. It just makes it harder on them. And like we're talking about it with coverage. We talked about getting these matchups on the interior and just like having Chop on the inside, and then you start running stunts with that. Like Chop's first step is what really gets O-lineman in trouble. So even if he's a guy like that's crashing down or he's looping, that's going to cause a lot of problems if you have a guy like him on the interior, and then who's ever the guy that he's working with on like that game, like Sieler or Campbell, that can do it from multiple different spots as well. It just makes it the life easier for the D coordinator. But yeah, I'll definitely get really into the edge group, because so far we've done, who did we do? We did safeties, and we did, who else did I do? I did tight ends. I did the safety group and the tight end group. I don't know if you guys saw those streams or they're videos now. They turned into videos. But we talked about like who I expect to make it out of those groups, or like who I like, or kind of what I'm thinking so far. And now D lineman's the third, and then after this we'll get into more and more position groups. But yeah. I know Muhammad rushed from a lot of wide 9 and 7 tech stands, but he can play 6, 5, 5, and 4. Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, 4 maybe too small for him. Yeah, those are reps though. Like you want to see in like obvious, maybe not 4, like especially not like as a 4i. You don't really get good pass rushing reps as a 4i typically, just based on your pre-snap alignment. And you really only want them guys playing more on the interior in those types of situations. Like you don't want him holding up on a 1st and 10 as a 4 technique. Not to say he couldn't do it every once in a while as like a 5 maybe, but I just don't think that's playing your players to their strengths exactly. But I get what we're saying. But yeah, Bonito Jones, 0 to 1 technique. I feel similarly to him about Gallimore. I think Bonito Jones has a decent shot at making the team just because of the situations we talked about. Like after Tart, he's kind of the next 0/1. He had starting playing time last season. He's a pretty consistent player for you too. I wouldn't expect him to be a huge part of the rotation though in those like pass rushing situations. You're going to see the other guys for sure. And with this group, like the Dolphins could keep 5 or 6. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they're just keeping 5 because they only use a 5-man rotation. And then they think that, we want to keep a body somewhere else. It wouldn't surprise me. Especially because they have a lot of edges too, like that kind of go into this rotation. Plus the edges kind of go with the linebackers as well. And it just depends, does Phillips and Chubb start on, those injury lists, and you have players like Chop and where's everyone else? Yeah, Shaq Barrett, Muhammad Kamara. You have some of your younger guys. But yeah. I better miss start. Sorry, say I'll look on the D line in 1 sentence. Thanks. 1 sentence. Okay. No, I mean, realistically, obviously led by Sieler. Feel good about that. I think Tart and Campbell, your top 2. Sieler, after Sieler, you have Sieler, Tart, and Campbell as your main 3 rotation. And then we just talked about Gallimore and Bonito Jones, who I think have the best chance after those 3 of making the squad, making the 53, just because I think Bonito is really only your 0 to 1 technique after Tart, and Gallimore has experience with the D-line coach. He has some higher upside than the other guys with his explosiveness upfield. I just have more concerns with Gallimore's film overall and consistency. But yeah. I don't think Tarkavius Jones is making the 53. I don't either. I do not either. Man, what happened to that guy? That's a good point. Lofi. We're gonna put some of these guys in practice squad and call them early while we get some guys coming off injuries. Yes, I think I talked about it a little bit earlier, but practice squad's gonna be very important this year. It's always been important, I think, these past few years, but it's gonna be even more important with the new rules. I think plenty of these guys, I think they're gonna keep multiple D linemen on the practice squad. Like you could see Deshon Hand or Jonathan Harris stick on the practice squad if they don't go somewhere else, and you're definitely gonna see them get raised up and down while maybe Phillips, Chubb, players like that are coming back. You never know with other injuries as well. But with the D line room, I could see them. This probably would be the room, if I had to guess, would have the most practice squad like raise elevations at the position. Just rotating people in and out, because that's why I'm thinking you keep 5, but then kind of rotate some people in, because you can get different reps out of different guys, and they're all like different types of players. Like Deshon Hand and Jonathan Harris are more like Bonito Jones is more of like 0 to 1 tech. Gallimore is like a penetrating 3 tech. You can keep Peely on there too, who could potentially rotate up, as he was a UDFA last year. But yeah. Isn't Bonito our true nose tackle? Yeah, Bonito, that's why I'm saying Bonito has the best chance of making it, because like him and Tart are really the only guys that play like 1 and 0. Like, and Bonito plays more nose than Tart does, but Tart does have experience playing as a nose and a 1 technique. That's why I feel pretty solid about Jones making the roster. Who is a safe bet to survive the practice squad, but who might be able to make a contribution? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I think I got to look at contracts too, but like I was thinking Deshon Hand potentially for the practice squad, and Jonathan Harris. I think if they end up going, let's say they go Sieler, Tart, Campbell, Bonito Jones, and Gallimore, and they keep those 5 initially. Like I wouldn't mind trying to get either Deshon Hand, Jonathan Harris, and then Brandon Peely on the practice squad, you probably only keep 2 of them. But the thing with Harris, I think Harris played so many snaps last season. I think he has a higher chance of getting picked up off the, like, if you cut him initially, because he played significant snaps last year for Denver. So I think he's more fresh in scouts' minds, because like these scouts are watching film on players. Deshon Hand didn't really play that much last season for the Dolphins. Like, he played in most of the games, but it was like barely any snaps. Like Jonathan Harris was playing significant snaps. So I think you might be able to sneak Deshon Hand on the practice squad and then elevate him and get playing time out of him. Same with someone like Brandon Peely, because he was a UDFA last year. They kept him on the squad. They ended up cutting him. Then they pushed him down to the practice squad and kept him on the practice squad. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But really, the only other ones, like, I think Gallimore and Bonito Jones have a pretty decent chance of getting picked up if you cut them. So I would say Hand and then Jonathan Harris. Dundee. Welcome to the Dundies. Okay, what do we just... we talked about Bonito Jones. We'll talk about Deshon Hand a little bit. Deshon Hand, he is a big name, though. I did talk about, like, he was a big name coming out of high school. Like, I'm looking at this. Right. Hand was one of the, like, #1 high school recruits, apparently, back in the day. He played for Alabama. He hasn't quite ever lived up to that, like, you know, his talent, but he is kind of a 3-4 DN type. Like, with his size, he's long, you know, good muscle, but he does play as like a 3-4 defensive end. So playing in like that 4-eye to 5 tech range is probably where you want to see him. He played okay for the Dolphins last season in his limited snaps. It wasn't anything crazy. I don't mind having him within the rotation if that's where they want to go with it. Like, I would say Hand is in like the kind of range of player, though, as like a Gallimore, a Bonito Jones, a Jonathan Harris. Like, in the right situation, they could all see, I think, similar amount of playing times if they're used the correct way. So I think Hand has like a... I put Hand in like a pretty like 50-50 to make the roster of it, I guess. Between the D-line on the 53 and those in the practice squad, it seems like a significant upgrade on D-line compared with last year. I would say the Dolphins upgraded their depth. I don't know if I would say they upgraded the position as a whole, because Wilkins was such a good player for them. Because, you know, Wilkins, you really lost your best player at the position, but I would say you definitely added more bodies. The real problem with the Dolphins' defensive line over the past few years is, like, Wilkins and Sieler played a ridiculous amount of snaps. Like, their percentage of snaps compared to the rest of the league. Wilkins was number 1. Sieler was, I think, number 4 on the list. So they're playing ridiculous amount of snaps. Like, Raekwon, who was the Dolphins' 3rd defensive tackle, wasn't even playing that much. For your 3rd D tackle, like, he doesn't play like crazy, you know? So I think you added more depth, which is nice. You definitely have more of a rotation, which I think is good for this system specifically. And I think Weaver will get the most out of them. So it's not something... I think after adding Campbell, I'm not super worried about the D tackle room. I said it, I think safety, D tackle, and interior line were like the 3 positions that Dolphins needed to add to with their June 1st cap if they were going to, and they added with safety first, which I liked. They went D tackle next, which I thought they were going to go interior line, but I'm not mad about it. I love bringing in Campbell on that deal. Yeah, losing Wilkins will hurt you a bit. Like, you lost a lot of snaps, and now you have to replace him, like, because he was playing crazy amount of snaps for his position. And then we'll see if they add an interior line. But yeah. What's up? Okay, who should I talk about next? Jonathan Harris. I think Jonathan Harris, after the guys we all named, I think Jonathan Harris is like the real last one out of this group, like the secondary group, like after the top 3. I think Harris is the next like tier of... I think there's like the top tier with Sieler, Tart, Campbell of your main 3. Then I think Gallimore, Bonito Jones, Deshon Hand, and Jonathan Harris are in the next tier of guys who have a chance of making the squad. Potentially Peely as well, but to me, when I did a video on Jonathan Harris when they first signed him. He played significant snaps last year for Denver. He's a very intriguing player, I think, with his like size and length, and he has some good movement skills too. Like, I think, you know, he could understand, like, have more of a pass rush plan. But I think with the Dolphins signing Campbell, that makes me feel less likely about him making the team, because I thought he was going to play more of that Campbell role. Because if you look at his size, I think he could be like a big edge, as we talked about with Campbell. He can do some stuff on the interior, maybe win with some athleticism versus more of the really interior guys. But with Harris, it's more of like length, holding up at the point of attack. I think he does a good job controlling his one primary gap, and then using his length to his advantage to stack and shed when necessary. So I think that does give him a chance to still make the squad. I just feel I would say less confident about him compared to some of the others because he's behind Campbell for sure. But then he also has to battle Deshon Hand, who I think plays a similar type role from him, to him. And then Hand's also not guaranteed to make the squad, even if Harris doesn't. So I just think that puts him in a tough position out of those guys. But he played a lot of snaps last year for Denver. Wasn't like a high impact player, but wasn't like completely horrible either. And usually, like when coaches see players playing snaps, they like that experience. They feel they trust them more. That's why I give him a chance to make it. I think Sieler, Tart, Campbell, Bonito, or locks. Sierras, Gallimore, Hand fight it out for 2 spots. Yeah, I mean, I would just throw Bonito more in the second group, but yeah, I get where you're going with Bonito because he plays that spot. But I do think Bonito out of that second group for me would have the highest chance of making the squad. But yeah, we're pretty much on the same page there, Scotty. Okay, that's like the main people I want to talk about. Like Dolphins obviously they have Isaiah Mack here on the roster. I have not watched anything on Isaiah Mack, so I don't have any really thoughts there. If he starts standing out in training camp and maybe looks good in preseason, I'll look into it more. But I really don't have any thoughts on him there because I'm not gonna lie and pretend like I've watched any Isaiah Mack film. I've watched everyone else at least. I've watched most of these guys actually very recently because the Dolphins signed Neville, Bonito Jones, Jonathan Harris. I watched all those guys when they got signed. And I obviously watched Campbell and Tart when they got signed. Lots of new bodies in this room. Peely, I watched last year when the Dolphins drafted him out of USC. I watched him in the preseason. He was one of the guys they kept around initially, I think, on the depth chart, right? He made the initial roster, and then I think he got released at some point in the season, but then they signed him back to the practice squad, so he stuck around. He was also one of those UDFAs they paid like extra at the signing, so he had a decent chance to make the squad. But he was another that he was interesting because he was more of like a one type of player in college, from what I remember, but was pretty athletic and had some pretty good movement skills for a guy of his size. So I think he's another guy like if he develops, I could see him maybe taking the next step. He would be out of these guys at the end of the roster, like Isaiah Mack and the other UDFAs. He would be the one with like the chance to push someone for a spot, but he has to develop, and I'm just not sure if I really feel that happening. That's not where I would guess it comes from, but I feel like Peely is probably like, if I had to look on this list and guess which of these guys make the practice squad, it would probably be Peely because I don't see him getting poached from other teams, getting picked up, and he was on the practice squad last year at some point, so I just feel like Brandon Peely is a practice squad guy. I know Mixon got cut for May. Who got cut for Campbell? Oh, it was a receiver, right? It was I think it was Matthew Sexton. Yeah. Not many locks once we see teams starting to shed players. That's fair too. I do think that's something I always forget to mention. Is you never know once teams start cutting. Now the Dolphins don't have like a super high. Like you have to think. Usually when teams start their priority is going to be in the 20s, like priority on the waivers. Because once all these teams start cutting players, usually you see like teams start to pick up other players on the waiver list. But usually that's more teams towards the top because they have all the priorities and stuff. But I would say if the Dolphins were to pick up someone, I could see it be. I think D tackle is one of those positions. It could happen post cuts because sometimes that's one of the positions. Sometimes where like a decent player ends up getting cut, and I think this is like one where. Oh, some other team has a lot of D tackles and they see that type of player as higher than a Gallimore or something and rather keep him compared to Gallimore because Dolphins have a lot of bodies here, but not after the top 3. Not a lot of guys who are like super locks to make any roster, That's kind of what I was. That's probably the position I would look at, and O-line, I would say. Interior O-line, interior D-line. I could see the Dolphins potentially making a move, but they have a pretty late waiver claim, so I still wouldn't put too much stock into that either. Yeah, nothing on Isaiah Mack, Leonard Payne, and Mario Kendricks. Talked about them a little bit. They're UDFA guys. I have watched them recently because I was watching a lot of the UDFA players. Both like Mario Kendricks was very undersized. I'm pretty sure he was like super small, but that guy was like a freaky athlete. So like, there's something to work there with. Like when you watched his best plays, it did come on things like twists and stunts with like how quickly he could get upfield and like take attention, as like a crash guy of multiple offensive linemen, and then the loop guy has open space to work with. So that kind of stuff does intrigue me. So if they wanted to keep like a Kendricks on the practice squad, maybe, but he was super small, and I don't know if he can hold up at the next level. And same with Leonard Payne. He was more of like a 5-tech guy. Kendricks was more of like a 3-tech player. Payne was more of like a 3-4 defensive end type. Out of Colorado, he had some pretty impressive athleticism too. Like he had some. I'm trying to remember exactly how I thought about him when I watched him, because it was a while ago. But I do remember some pretty impressive movement skills. But he ended up on the ground so often, and I do not think he can hold up like at the point of attack at the next level. Like his play strength needed so much work. So he would have to add a lot of play strength for me to feel comfortable at him ever, developing at the next level. So I'm not putting too much stock in those guys. Maybe they make it around on the practice squad. You never know, but don't really see either of them making the roster. The Gallimore / Weaver connection makes me think he stays. Yeah, he has a connection with our D-line coach, right? Because our D-line coach was his coach in Dallas. So I think that's why I think Gallimore and Bonito Jones, I think out of the next group, have the best chance to make the squad. I can see a couple of vets moving around the league during training comes up. Yep. Yeah. That's the D-line group. I'm hoping a decent right guard shakes loose. I agree. That's probably the final position where there's not like, you're probably the least comfortable right now across the board with your right guard spot. You probably feel decent about every other position, which, to be fair, most teams have like at least one. Most teams have multiple spots where they're not super comfortable. But yeah, right guard is probably the position you're least comfortable with right now. Plus, you're also not like super comfortable at left guard because Isaiah Wynn has a lot of injury history. But yeah. Bonito Jones will start. I could see him starting some games, but I don't think he's gonna play. Like, it depends what you mean by start. Like he could start, but not see like crazy snaps, because he is like a base defense type of guy. You get him in your base and you play him as a nose. I could see him getting some snaps at nose within the system. He'll definitely be a part of the rotation, but I don't think he'll see like a starter amount of rotation snaps, if that makes sense. Because last year he started certain games for the Lions, but there would be games he starts but then only play like 20 snaps. That's kind of like if he does make the team, what I see for Bonito. Robert Jones start at right guard, definitely possible. Would be nice. Got to know crazy line means. Oh yeah, we can talk about Connor. Let's talk about Connor Williams, because there was that tweet, I think it was literally yesterday, from Schefter, right? That Connor Williams apparently trying to come back and he's good to go. That was kind of contradictory to the other stuff we've seen on him. But in my opinion, I even tweeted about it. Connor Williams is, if he is healthy and ready to go, he is far and away the best O-lineman available. Like, even if he's a better center than guard, I would rather play him at guard than any of the other options out there, plus what we have on the roster, personally. Because for me, I've said it, I would start Jack Driscoll at right guard for what they have right now, just for scheme fit wise and from what I've seen. But I would rather have Connor Williams than everyone else. If he's good to go, because we don't know health wise, but from what Schefter said, it seemed like he's trying to get out there. I definitely don't mind bringing him back at some point. I'm gonna start season and play most knows. Career cost Connor big money. I just can't see Connor wanting to come back to Miami anyway. He's got to be pissed. Yeah, it does look like, from what I've seen people talking about, it doesn't feel like, at least the vibe I get is Connor's looking at other teams more. So it's definitely something I'm not expecting to happen. But if they were to sign an O-lineman, I'd rather sign Connor than the rest of the guys. That's just my opinion, though. And that's like, and we don't know. Yeah, there could be bad blood. We don't know. Not in the rooms. What else has been happening? Oh, I saw I need to watch that video. I saw Kyle Krabs. He did like the interview with Kurt Warner. I gotta watch that. I don't know if you guys saw that, but I have it pulled up. I just haven't watched it yet. But I know there's like some clips of Warner talking about like the anticipation and all that stuff. So that's very exciting. I think he does a really good job with all that stuff. So that'll be exciting to see. He's not healthy, dude. Yeah. I'm not expecting him to play right now. But the report that Schefter tweeted said he was trying to sign with the team before training camp. So maybe he's more ahead of schedule than people thought. Because the reports earlier were like he's not going to even play again, which is the ACL was so bad he'd never play again, which was crazy too. So I don't know. Connor not strong enough to play guard. Brewer might be able to. Well, I think Connor's stronger than Brewer. Plus, if you look at the Dolphins guards, they're not very strong. Like Isaiah Wynn and Jack Driscoll are not very those aren't very strong guards. They're more athletes. Robert Jones is pretty strong. Liam's, whatever. But within this system, it's more important athlete-wise. But yeah. Any other players, topics you guys want to talk about? I got into the D-line room, did all of that, watched some clips. I think I went out through all the clips that I wanted to watch with Sieler and all that good stuff. Connor led the league in holding with the Cowboys. Yeah, I remember Cowboys fans telling me that, and I remember watching the film and not giving a shit. I remember, dude, how many times Patriots fans told me the same thing with Isaiah Wynn. They told me Isaiah Wynn was their Liam Eichenberg. They're like, that's how we viewed Liam Eichenberg. I'm like, well, I just watched Isaiah Wynn's film, and he's a way better fit for the Dolphins than Eichenberg was, and he played well when healthy. I watched Connor Williams' film, and I saw Connor Williams be like, oh yeah, he could slide to the interior and play the Dolphins interior so much better than what he had to play in Dallas. So I think Connor Williams would not play guard as good as he would center, but I think he would play it much better than what the Dolphins have at right guard currently on the roster. But that's if he's healthy. In my opinion, there's zero interest chance Miami plays Williams at center when Brewer's healthy. I agree, Dundee. I would think that'd be a mistake. I think Brewer is not a guard. Connor Williams and Brewer are both centers, but I think Connor has a much better chance of playing guard than center. Brewer, Eichenberg, or Connor for center? I mean, right now I'd say Brewer because he's definitely. I wouldn't trust Connor's health, and I think Brewer's the perfect. To me, Brewer's the perfect scheme fit, especially in the running game for what the Dolphins need. I actually think a very athletic center like that with those movement skills and ability to cut off is such an important role for the Dolphins' running scheme. So I would say Brewer. Plus, Brewer's definitely better than Eichenberg, and Connor is. We don't know with health-wise, so. But I'd rather have Connor at guard than Eichenberg. Taj makes the 53? Oof. That's a tough one. I'm going to get into the receivers, but I think there's a chance. I'm rooting for it personally. I would keep Taj on the 53. I think he has a chance. It's just that's a tough room, man, because they're going to keep 6 receivers, and they have 8 guys, I think, with a legitimate chance to make the roster. And some of those guys like Barrios, he has the receiving thing that kind of helps him make the roster. But if he doesn't win the receiving, I mean returning. If he doesn't win the returning job, then that kind of hurts his chances. Yeah. I definitely feel Brewer's gonna be the starting center. I don't really buy any. I know some people talk about moving him to guard. I think that would be a big mistake. So Brewer is strong enough to. I mean, yeah. I see people talk about the strength thing with Connor and guard center. I mean, at the same I think from guard to center, it's not that big of a deal. If you have the strength to hold up at one, you can do it at the other as well. But it just depends how you slide your protection. Plus, honestly, I think Connor was the guy that bullied people. Since he's been on the Dolphins, I feel like he's been more of a bully on the offensive line compared to when he was in Dallas. Some people think Fuller is not an upgrade over X. What's your opinion? I think Fuller has outplayed X the past few seasons. So yeah, Fuller is definitely an upgrade. Personally. Yeah, that's a good point, Scotty. At worst, it's probably a wash, but I definitely would say Fuller has been a better player. X has always struggled to stay healthy too, and from what I watched, I thought Kendall's film was quite good. Barrios gone likely, barring injuries to other receivers. Yeah, personally, I've said this. I think Barrios would be the first receiver gone for me. I just don't know if that's how the Dolphins feel because he was a very reliable returner last year. Like he never fumbled any punt returns. Usually when he returned kickoffs, he at least got back to the 25. Like he didn't have anything like splashy in special teams, but like he was reliable. I feel like the Dolphins might value that. Personally, I would let Barrios go, and then if I had to let another one go, like I think you can get. I've said this. I think you can get Craycraft on the practice squad, and then like because if you cut Taj is getting picked up. I think that's pretty high, like a high chance. I think if you cut Craycraft, I think there's a decent chance you keep Craycraft on the practice squad, and you can just elevate him a bunch, and he would still play within the rotation. Because I don't know if you cut someone like Ezukanma or Taj. I think both of those guys probably get picked up. Being younger players, scouts have had eyes on them more recently, when they were doing draft work. But yeah. Maybe we would sign Brewer ages ago before he did. I'm confident he'll make a great contribution. Yeah, I think the Brewer signing has been kind of underrated, actually, because I think he's about to elevate the Dolphins running game. Like he is. Yes, there's some problems with him in pass protection, but the Dolphins scheme definitely will. I think the Dolphins scheme is the absolute perfect place for him because it absolutely plays to his strengths. Like what the Dolphins scheme does really well, like needs really well from the offensive line, is what Brewer does best, and that's his movement skills in the running game. And then how it protects people is in pass protection, especially on the interior. So it protects his weaknesses and it amplifies his strengths. So I feel very good about Brewer making a big contribution this season. Agreed. Craycraft on the practice squad. I just think Craycraft, out of those 8 guys that you have that are going to fight for a spot, Craycraft is the one with the best chance of making a practice squad. Plus, I feel like the Dolphins just really like him. Like he knows the system better than most of these receivers. He's reliable. He's a very good blocker. He's probably the best blocking receiver on the team. Also, I wonder. I've always also with like Jody Fortson. We talked a little bit about Jody Fortson. I wonder if the Dolphins kind of see him as like a pseudo receiver tight end. So I wonder if they're going to keep an extra body at one of these positions. I wonder if they just keep 4 tight ends and then have Fortson be like a 4th tight end / 7th receiver almost type, because he kind of does both. But that's just depending on how other things play out, and if they want to keep one less quarterback, or they keep only 3 running backs this time around instead of 4 like they have in the past. But who knows? Armstead, Connor, and Hunt were all top 5 in their position last season. We have that same production this year from a new line. I think tackle wise, you're going to see the same from last year. Obviously, you still have pretty much the same tackle room. I think interior wise, I think you'll get pretty much. I think Brewer run blocking wise will get you even maybe better production than Connor did, and Connor was really good. So I think you're going to see similar production run blocking wise in that situation. Interior line, like Wynn, if he stays healthy, will give you what he probably gives last season. I think right guard is just a fall off. Like you're losing something from Hunt. Like you don't have Robert Hunt. You're not going to find a Robert Hunt level player on this roster or even as a pickup. So that's kind of where these other guys have to step up. I'm sorry, we can. I mean, I'm down. I agree. Barrios is the guy I would move on from, especially with the new kickoff return rules. I think they're going to put guys back there like Achan and potentially like Jalen Wright, more running backs because of how the new rules work. I think you just need to find someone that can replace him as a punt return, and I hope that can be like Malik Washington, because Malik Washington, very reliable hand. So hopefully, and he's a great tracker of the football. So hopefully he can track in a punt and catch those punts consistently. That's all you really need. You just need a punt returner who doesn't fumble, and that's kind of what Barrios was. So hopefully Malik Washington can take that punt returner role, and then you have guys like Achan do the kick returner role, because with the new rules, I think they might want to put those guys back there. And then that could leave Barrios on the outside, not on the roster. Later, Flipper. Timing offense, Tua throws to spot, so it comes down to who can run precise routes. Yeah, I think, that's why they love Craycraft. It's like they want guys who know where to be. Like, you got to be in the right spot at the right time because everything is so timing based. Lots of anticipation, obviously. And you also have to be pretty fast because usually Tua is used to throwing those timing routes to like players like Waddle and Tyreek. Yeah, that's why I think they might like Craycraft more than some of these other guys. But yeah. Saw Malik Washington throw football. It was pretty good. That's a high school kid, I'm pretty sure. There's a high rated high school prospect coming out named Malik Washington. He's like a 4-star recruit or something like that. Move beyond the throw. Here's the thing with the spot throwing stuff. I feel like the narrative about the spot throwing stuff, I don't really know if I agree with either side. Like people use it as like a negative that Tua throws to spots. Yes, sometimes Tua throws to spots. I mean, every quarterback throws to spots sometimes. Tua just happens to be the best in the NFL when it comes to anticipation and throwing to spots. I don't know why people see it as a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I think he does it better than anyone. It's actually a very hard thing to do, which he does to a very high level. Like the timing and has to be like down to the minute details. That's why Warner praised him for being able to throw to spots. I just think people use that as like a negative term, So, but I also think people think that he only throws to spots. That's not true either. Like there's times where he definitely goes through his, progressions. Things aren't there perfectly. It's also a scheme thing too, which I think the scheme asks him to do that from time to time. But yeah, Armstead did an interview with Ross Target this season. He's mostly healthy and yeah, I saw that. Hopefully, if Armstead stays healthy, I mean, that'd be great. That'd be amazing. That would be unlikely, but you never know. Tua stayed healthy last season. People didn't expect that. I think there's always a chance for people to, stay healthy. Sometimes people just get unlucky too. But I'm not too worried about the tackle position. I mean, you have Armstead, you have Jackson, who stepped up last season. Even if they get hurt, you still have Kendall Lamb. I even saw good things out of Keon Smith last year. They drafted Patrick Paul. I'm not too worried about the tackle position as a position, but yeah. Okay, yeah. Went for about an hour. Okay. Any more questions? Because I gotta go somewhere pretty soon. I got at least a little bit of time. I don't know. I'll probably do the receiver group next because receiver group is pretty interesting. We obviously have a pretty clear, we have a clear top two. Odell is probably your third. And then after that, it's like, who knows where people slot in. I'm a big Malik Washington fan, but you never know who makes the roster. So I think it's an interesting group to talk about. We talked about some of the more interesting groups with the tight ends, the D tackles, the safeties, and then I think receivers will be next. And then we'll go into, keep continuing to other groups like O-line and stuff. Lamb, I think this is his last year too. Yes. I think, yeah, he said he's retiring, so that's why they drafted Patrick Paul, so. And Keon Smith, I've talked about Keon Smith. I think he's another tackle they should be keeping around as well as a swing guy. Armstead wasn't even healthy when he was healthy. Yeah, that's the biggest problem is they kept rushing him back, and he never, even when he had to play, he wasn't healthy, which is the problem because he didn't even get to play to his highest potential on the field, even in the games he did play, which sucks. But yeah. In your opinion, can you explain why the front office the O-line way too much? Yeah, so Greg, this is what I think it comes down to. I think there's positions on both sides of the ball, interior O-line, interior D-line, that the Dolphins kind of, they didn't really neglect completely, but they didn't go after high-end players at those positions from players they lost. And that's because I think schematically, McDaniel knows that when he looks at his roster and he looks at Tua's strengths. And what Tua does really well is get rid of the ball very quickly. And, he's very good with his timing and anticipation. So he realized, hey, I got to value high-end receivers more than I value O-line play. So he valued the receivers. He went after Tyreek. They had Waddle. They've been adding all these big-time playmakers because they think that can maximize Tua's skill set more. And then he thinks Tua's ability can hide the interior O-line play more. And with how much they run play action, without how much they slide their protections. Like if you watch the Dolphins O-line, it's actually, I'm pretty sure there's a stat for this. Like there's a, one of those like graphs they put on Twitter. There's a stat where like how much like true like true pass block like one-on-one rates they get into, like how many true one-on-one pass rush reps they get into. And the Dolphins O-line is like way below, way at the bottom, like not even close to any other team. Like he does a really good job of like making their lives easy in pass protection. So I think that's why he's like, if there's a position we have to, ignore less, it'd be O-line. And that's why I think, on D-line, after they let Wilkins go, they just had a bunch of bodies, but no one high end, because they think Weaver thinks he can get the most out of that position. I do not necessarily, I would have added more to the O-line personally, but that's kind of the logic behind it. Not win rate, my bad. It's like how much like true one-on-ones they get, like pass block one-on-ones. Win rate was not the right word to use. The Dolphins were way at the bottom because they rarely ever got true one-on-ones. Like if you watch a game, like you would see like a guard for another team, he'd have a one-on-one pass block, every other snap. For the Dolphins, it was like once every 10 snaps would their guard have a one-on-one. Truly. That's why I've talked about it. Isaiah Wynn going down hurt them a lot because when they slid their protection, it was always away from Isaiah Wynn, and Wynn was very good in his one-on-one situations. But once Wynn went down, like they were very rarely giving Cotton or Eichenberg or who else was playing guard for them? Robert Jones. They barely gave them true one-on-ones just because they could get rid of the ball so quickly. They would full slide protection. So that's how they protected them. Yeah, sorry, not win rate. That was my bad. That's what I said. That's kind of like the logic behind it. Not necessarily like I even talked about it, like I would have added another guard like higher in the draft personally, but I think that's the position they think they can get away with. But yeah. This is what I don't understand. Greg Cosell is the king of all 22. Don't NFL coaches and quarterback go to Cosell for film. Why is spot throwing such a bad term? Anticipation, same to me in my opinion. Yeah, well, one, I don't think Cosell was necessary. Like, I've seen that video, and I think people kind of overreacted to it. Like, I do think, like, he was probably a little too harsh with some of the wording he used, but I do think, like, he wasn't trying to be, like, that harsh on Tua. I actually think he talked pretty glowingly about Tua at times, too, in that video. But people think, like, I think people equate throw to a spot as, like, you're not reading the defense. You're just throwing to a spot. You're not making actual reads, which is not true. Usually, you're actually reading a specific defender, and based on what he does, you're throwing it into a different spot, which is what most quarterbacks do. Tua just does it at a higher rate, I would say, than most. It's not something he does every time, but yeah. I think that's sort of just, there's just these terms that, get thrown around and people use them as negatives, but yeah. My hot take is Lamb doesn't make the 53. OT's going to be tricky. Do we keep 5 or do we lose count for 1 year of Lamb as backup? It's a fair point, Scotty. My guess is I've said it, I would keep, I don't know, man. I mean, it's tough. I've said it, if we were going to keep one extra spot on the offense, I would have done O-line just to keep Keon Smith and 5 tackles. But it's definitely a possibility. And who knows, maybe if they think they can keep Keon Smith on the practice squad, or they just roll with fucking 4 interior O-linemen, which I don't think they'll do that, but I think they might just keep 10 O-line and then keep 6 receivers, 3 running backs, 3 tight ends. But who knows? It's not that bad of a take. It's definitely possible. I don't want to get rid of Keon Smith. I'm a big fan. But yeah, okay. Since we have not picked a guy like Van Roden, do you think there's a chance of Connor Williams? We talked about that a little bit earlier. People brought up points that like maybe Connor doesn't want to resign. I mean, I don't know. I've said it. I would resign Connor over any other offensive lineman available. I think Connor is the best O-line available on the market if he's healthy. I think if the medicals check out and Connor wants to come back, I think it's a no-brainer personally. He probably won't be ready right away. So, maybe they keep him on IR if that's the case for the initial part of the season. But I would be down to bring Connor back. But we don't know if he's... I think the only problem is I think Connor has found a spot at center in this league. And I think Brewer is going to be the Dolphin center this year. And Connor might not want to play guard. He might just want to be like, hey, I'm just going to go somewhere else and play center. So that's kind of my thoughts on it personally. So we have an offense in totality and sense that individual components don't matter so long as the whole is good. It's a fair way to look at it. Kind of serviceable. Yeah, I think for what he was definitely serviceable last year for Played better than expected. I still feel like there's potential there too. Like there's still things he can improve on. And he has a lot of good traits too. So like he's the guy right now who I think is actually a pretty serviceable guy that if you needed to come in as a depth guy, you actually feel pretty comfortable with him. Plus there's still more upside there. So I like keeping Keon around. So all this, do we sign Egenberg doing essentially we don't sign Garner? I wouldn't. I'd let him go. I think the Liam experiment, even if I even say this, if Egenberg plays this year, I expect him to look improved. I think especially if he plays right guard specifically, I think he's a better right guard than anywhere else, or even left guard. If he plays guard only, I actually think he'll see more success than he saw last year. But I just would rather move on and get different depth piece. I don't even think he's that bad of a depth guy, but I think that for me, I would rather not, unless he's coming on literally nothing. But yeah. But to be fair, Greer does like, to keep his guys around. We'll see if he, as Dundee says, he expects it will happen. I wouldn't do it this offseason though. If they're gonna re-sign him, I would rather let it just like play out until he's like truly a free agent. Okay, but yeah, yeah, good points all around. Good talk. We'll do another stream soon. I'm gonna do a Sieler video next, I think. I don't know. Let me look at this list. We haven't I broken down film on in a while that I kind of want to get to. I want to do film breakdowns of guys from how I expect them to look next season. I think Sieler's probably next. I want to get another. I want to get a Jalen Phillips video out there because I think Phillips needs to be talked about a lot. But yeah, film breakdowns coming soon. Eichenberg 3 orange jersey in 3 years. It's funny. Okay.